Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're diving into the 19th explainer in our series on communication, and this one is all about common communication mistakes. I'm seriously thrilled to have you here. Whether we're at the office, sitting in a classroom, or just hanging out with family at the dinner table, we spend a massive amount of our day just talking. But here's the fascinating and honestly kind of frustrating truth. Speaking does not always equal true communicating. Just because words are literally leaving your mouth, it doesn't mean your message is actually landing. So today, we're going to look really closely at why that happens. We'll explore 4 incredibly common everyday communication mistakes that act like these invisible roadblocks between us and the people we're trying so hard to connect with. Let's get into it.
To really grasp what's going wrong, we first need to get a solid handle on what communication is actually supposed to be. Scholars Rogers and Kincaid beautifully define communication as a process to reach mutual understanding. Now, notice what isn't in that definition. They don't say communication is just talking at someone or firing off a quick email. No, successful communication only happens when the meaning is truly understood by both parties. So if the other person doesn't get your meaning, the communication has effectively failed. It doesn't matter how eloquently you spoke, how loud your voice was, or how perfectly you typed out that message. The ultimate goal here isn't just broadcasting. The goal is shared understanding.
And so, what exactly prevents that mutual understanding? Well, scholars Shannon and Weaver developed this absolutely brilliant framework for this. It was originally meant for technical systems, but it applies perfectly to human beings. It's the concept of signal versus noise. In their model, the signal is your true meaning. It's the core idea you actually want the other person to grasp. But noise? Noise is any psychological, semantic, or interpersonal interference that distorts or blocks your message. Think of it like static on a radio. What we're going to learn in this explainer is that our own bad communication habits, things we literally do every single day, often without even realizing it, actually function as this noise. They scramble our signal, create major confusion, and ultimately, they damage our relational connections.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. First, we'll look at the illusion of communication. Then, the danger of assumptions, followed by interruptions and emotional noise. After that, we'll tackle the trap of vagueness and over-explaining details. And finally, we'll wrap up by covering exactly how to restore the communication signal.
Section 1. The illusion of communication.
Section 2. The danger of assumptions.
We just briefly touched on the illusion of communication. Researcher David Berlow created something called the Source Message Channel Receiver Model. What this model basically shows us is that the effectiveness of our communication doesn't just rely on the words themselves. It depends heavily on the skills, the attitudes, the knowledge level, and the culture of both the sender and the receiver. See, when we assume communication is just a simple transfer of data, we fall right into an illusion. We think, well, I said it, so they must understand it, right? But because of all those incredibly complex human variables, misunderstandings are actually the default state unless we actively work against them. This illusion perfectly sets the stage for our first major disruptor, which is assumptions. An assumption happens when we accept something as absolutely true without bothering to check if it's actually accurate. Which brings up a critical question. Why do we guess instead of ask? Have you ever thought about this in your own life? Asking a clarifying question actually requires a bit of effort, and more importantly, it requires vulnerability. Often we distort our communication signal because we're terrified of appearing ignorant, weak, or confrontational. We don't want to bother our manager, or we don't want to admit to a teacher that we're completely lost. So, we guess. And that guess acts as massive noise in the communication channel.
These scenarios are just so relatable. Think about it. A teacher looks out at a quiet room and assumes the silence means everyone understands, when really, the students might just be super shy. A manager assigns a task and assumes the employee knows exactly how to do it just because it's easy for the manager. Or, think about this one. A friend assumes your delayed text reply means you're angry when you were literally just stuck in a meeting. Scholars Littlejohn and Foss point out that we interpret messages through our own personal frame of reference. When we let our own biases drive our assumptions, it leads to wrong actions, missed deadlines, and deeply unfair emotional judgments.
Moving right along to Section 3, interruptions and emotional noise.
Interrupting someone cuts them off before they can finish, which immediately signals disrespect and just shatters the entire flow of communication. But linguist Deborah Tannen notes that we really have to make a clear distinction in conversational styles here. A cooperative interruption is when you enthusiastically interject with a yes, exactly, or I totally understand. That actually shows active involvement and support. A competitive interruption, on the other hand, is a genuinely harmful move where someone jumps in to hijack the conversation, change the topic, or just completely silence the speaker. This type of interruption is a massive barrier to reaching that mutual understanding we talked about earlier.
So if I just rush my delivery right now and talk over the end of your thought, you see how jarring that is? It immediately puts you on the defensive. Scholars Wolven and Coakley argue that listening is actually a learned behavior. It involves a very specific sequence: reception, attention, perception, interpretation, and finally response. When you competitively interrupt someone, you are skipping straight to the response phase before you've even finished the reception phase. You are reacting to completely incomplete information, which almost guarantees a misunderstanding and leaves the other person feeling entirely dismissed.
Section 4. The Trap of Vagueness.
Vagueness creeps in when our messages are unclear, imprecise, or incomplete. You know, when we use words like soon, properly, or handle it. These imprecise words leave far too much room for dangerous interpretations. They act as a thick layer of semantic noise over our actual signal. Imagine a manager saying, "Finish the work soon." Well, what exactly does soon mean? An hour? Tomorrow? Sometime by Friday? This is exactly how deadlines get missed. Now consider the clear version. Please email the final report by 3 p.m. today. Business communication experts Guffey and Lowy, along with organizational scholars Robbins and Judge, constantly emphasize how this kind of metric-driven, precise instruction prevents workplace inefficiency and chaos. Clear expectations coordinate action. Vague expectations coordinate confusion.
The core theory behind this comes from Ogden and Richards, who argued that meaning does not automatically exist in the words themselves. The receiver actually has to connect the symbol to the thought. So when you're vague, you force the receiver to guess the referent, which is the actual thing or action you are referring to. Think about it in a personal relationship. If you say something like, "You never support me," that is incredibly vague. What does support mean in this specific context? Because you weren't precise, the receiver has to guess what you mean, and honestly, they will likely guess wrong. That just leads to defensiveness and immense relationship insecurity.
Section 5. Over-explaining. Drowning in details.
Over-explaining happens when anxiety or perhaps an overly eager desire to sound knowledgeable causes someone to provide way more information than is actually necessary. Ironically, by trying to be too clear, they end up destroying the clarity of the message entirely. The philosopher Paul Grice proposed the cooperative principle of conversation, which includes something called the maxim of quality. It says you should provide exactly as much information as needed, no more, no less. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when we violate that maxim. A tiny 15% slice, representing the actual main point, gets completely swallowed up by 85% of unnecessary details, background, and noise. The listener just gets mentally exhausted trying to fish out the main point. Here is a perfect everyday example. Someone declines a meeting by giving this 5-minute, incredibly anxious, detailed story about their car, their cat, and their crazy schedule. Compare that to the direct version. "I cannot attend because I have a medical appointment." Technical communication experts Markle and Selber really emphasize this principle of usability. Giving too many reasons actually works against you. It makes you sound defensive, it completely wastes the receiver's time, and it severely weakens your persuasion. Keep it direct and highly usable.
Section 6. Restoring the communication signal.
So we've identified the 4 major disruptors: assumptions, interruptions, vagueness, and over-explaining. Now let's synthesize everything we've learned in this explainer by looking at exactly how we can repair these mistakes. We need to restore both the meaning of our messages and the relational trust that these bad habits slowly erode. Scholar Joseph DeVito teaches that communication mistakes aren't just data loss, they are deeply relational errors. Every single message sends a signal about how you view the other person. Let's look at assumptions. The hidden relational meaning there is, "I already know what you mean, so I don't really need to listen." Interruptions basically shout, "My point is more important than yours." Vagueness signals, "I am avoiding being direct with you." And over-explaining softly insults the other person by saying, "I don't trust your intelligence to grasp this the first time." Realizing how these mistakes actually feel to the other person is the absolutely crucial first step in restoring mutual trust.
So the crucial point is how we actually go about fixing our internal processing. We can use Judy Brownell's listening model outlined in 3 deliberate steps. Step 1 is understanding, gathering the full message without jumping to judgment. Step 2 is evaluating, processing what it actually means. And finally, step 3 is responding. By deliberately following this specific procedure, we ensure active listening. We force ourselves to deliberately slow down our cognitive processing, and that prevents us from prematurely jumping to conclusions, interrupting out of sheer frustration, or making wild, unchecked assumptions before the other person has even finished communicating.
Let's summarize these highly actionable remedies. To kill assumptions, ask clarifying questions instead of guessing. Try something like, "Did I understand correctly that the deadline is tomorrow?" To stop interrupting, intentionally wait for pauses. And hey, try taking notes if you're worried about forgetting your point. To defeat vagueness, use specific dates, names, and actionable metrics. And to stop over-explaining, clearly identify your main point before you even open your mouth. The legendary psychologist Carl Rogers emphasized that empathy is the key condition for meaningful communication. When we use these specific tools, we are actively demonstrating empathy. We are protecting the integrity of the communication signal, and ultimately, we are protecting the relationship itself.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. Which of these 4 communication mistakes, assumptions, interruptions, vagueness, or over-explaining, is currently creating the most noise in your relationships? I challenge you to reflect honestly on your own conversational habits today. Pick just one of these areas and intentionally apply the actionable remedies we just discussed to clear up your signal.
Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this breakdown helpful and want to continue mastering your communication skills, please do me a huge favor. Like this explainer, drop a comment below with your answer to our final question, share this with a colleague or friend, and be sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss an update. I'll see you in the next one.